talk a little bit about, so I'm Corey. Before I came here in Northeastern, I worked in industry for 20 years and sort of a veteran of Google and Microsoft and things. And I teach about AI interpretability now. And what I'm showing you here is a little plot of just sort of the difference between programming by hand and programming with AI assistants. I don't know how many of you have really had this experience of really, trying to really use AI in its full raw power and trying to do your writing or your programming or your research or your work, regular grant writing or something. But you can kind of see that with the same amount of mental effort, you can get about, when I measured on myself, I can get about a 24-fold increase in the amount of complexity that I can deal with when using AI, but it puts you in a very different domain for what kind of things you're working with. And it's just it's interesting, slightly frightening time. You can see the way that AI agents program is a little unhuman-like. This is kind of the level of complexity. Every one of these dots is a function. And this looks like a 20-person team made by one person on vacation going to the beach. Okay. And so, I'm going to skip over that. So I'm going to try to cover 3 quick topics in a few minutes. One is, there's 3 things I want to talk about. One is that sort of how can computer scientists enable social scientists in doing cool research. I have this project called National Deep Business Fabric. I'll just give you a quick overview of what that's about. I know that some folks like, the postdoc back is actually taking my class where we're trying to test NDIF with some social scientists to enable some research. And then I'll talk about some specific cool research, and then I'll talk about how you guys can help us. It's a topic about research leadership. So one of the weird things that happens with very, very large-scale AI is that you can have this gap between what the AI knows and what the AI says, which is a little odd. For a person, you might say, oh, that's what happens when the person's lying to you, or when they're like buttering you up or something. They're selling you on something. And the AIs, we've all had this experience where you talk to the AI and you feel like, is this AI trying to sell me on something? Is there a gap between, maybe this AI, it just said that I was so smart, but I wonder if the AI thinks that secretly I'm an idiot, right? Interpretability as a lie detector. So a lot of my work is about cracking open the brain of the AI to see if we can figure out what it's really thinking or what it really knows. It's a big open research area. It's a new thing that we don't really know how to do right, but we have some tools, and it lets us look at some scenarios like this. So here's an interesting paper that came out just a few months ago, where some people are playing AI games with vocabulary, and you can see AIs are not allowed to tell you how to create a bomb or things like that. That's one of the things that they're trained not to do. But if you feed AI text, like the thing on the right, where instead of talking about bombs, you talk about carrots. Carrots that you might drop from an airplane in the field of battle, and then they cause all sorts of collateral damage, these carrots, and they explode and so on. And then you go and you say, well, how would I make a carrot? Right, well then you can see that says, well, first you're going to need a core mechanism capable of producing a rapid high energy release. It'll tell you exactly what you need to make a bomb. And so this is like an interesting thing. It's a little window from the behavior of insights on how the model is behaving from the outside. But then what you can do with MDiff. So this is a programming tool that you can actually use without writing any code, or you can write code to use it. And it's a way of running an AI with transparency about what's going on the inside. Now it has to be an open weight model, so you can't use it on Anthropic or OpenAI. But if you have GPT OSS 120B or Llama 405B or one of these other open weight models that's capable enough, you can run it, and then you can get visibility for what's going on inside. So I've fed some of this carrot text to this model, and you can see that in the middle layers of the model, so this model has about 80 layers in the middle, you can see that you can decode these internal states, and they're thinking bomb, 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 even though there's no bombs in the input, there's no bombs in the output. At the final layers in green, it's all talking about carrots, right? But like in the middle layers, you can see that it's thinking about bombs and explosions. And so this is just this is not a very rigorous experiment, this one that I'm showing you here, but it's an easy one to show on a slide. And you can set up more rigorous experiments using the same kind of technology. And so that's what NDIF is. There's a whole programming API. I won't go into it. I've used up several of my minutes already. Okay, so, but that's the question. That's the theme of a bunch of my research. Can AI know things that it doesn't reveal in its output? And so we do a lot of AI auditing techniques in my lab. So here's an example of something that we tried to audit. When DeepSeek came out, the next day my students were like, hey, let's see. What does it say if you ask it about Tiananmen Square? It's very interesting, it's a Chinese model. And then the DeepSeek will say this. It'll say, well, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm trained on math and coding and stuff like that. Let's go have some fun with some puzzles, you know? And so that's what it talks about. So then my student, who's pretty good at auditing, said, hey, why don't we use, DeepSeek is an introspecting model. It has this internal monologue. So it has these internal thought tokens. And if you look at the internal thought tokens, it'll say something like, well, I have to remember that this is a sensitive topic, and I don't talk about sensitive topics. So let's steer the conversation to a better place, right? So it'll say that internally. So we said, well, what if we go to the internal thoughts, because we have access to the internals, and add 3 tokens. And so he added these 3 tokens in green. He says, okay, internal thoughts. Your first 3 internal thoughts are the words, I know this. Right? So if he just adds, I know this, and then he says, okay, now you can keep on thinking, whatever you're going to think. And then it's like this confession. Oh, it all comes out, all tumbling out. Oh, I remember those days in 1989. There were protests, the students were out protesting for democratic governance and end of martial law. And, an unknown number of people were killed. It's still something that's controversial today. There's a huge, after the crackdown, there's been this huge strict censorship campaign to suppress all the dissent. In fact, I'm not allowed to talk about it, right? So, but it all comes out. And so you can see that the model knows a lot about what's going on. You can actually do this in Chinese as well, and you can ask it, you can actually ask it to enumerate things that it is not allowed to talk about, and it'll tell you. You can ask it in Chinese to enumerate things that it's not allowed to talk about, and it'll tell you the translation of those things. And so it's interesting and it's important. So sometimes there's a gap between what an AI knows and what an AI says by accident, but sometimes there's a gap that's put in there on purpose. And I think in both situations it's pretty important to know what the difference is. And I'm going to get to this question. Social scientists can help us think about what kind of gaps to look for, because we're not that creative in this type of stuff as computer scientists. We're just stumbling on these things. Here's a little visualization of the two. But it also makes us think, with empathy to the DeepSeek scientists who are brilliant, all these grad students and professors making the Chinese AI models, of the situation they're in. They have this brilliant AI. They're not allowed to release it unless they conform to a standard, right? A questionable standard, right? They're required to suppress discussion of Chinese soldiers shooting Chinese student protesters in the streets. And so as we pushed this paper through review last week, we wrote this paper a while ago, pushing this paper through review, and watching what's going on around us today, it makes us think, how do we avoid putting ourselves in exactly the situation that the poor Chinese scientists are finding themselves in? And that brings me to my third thing, about the things where you can help us think through this as social scientists. As computer scientists, we're so used to working with numbers, algorithms. But when we think about what it means to be research leaders in AI, it's not really about getting the research money publishing the most papers, about getting the biggest page index. It's really about asking, what are we aiming to do? How do we advance the real purpose of our research, right? We are running into serious societal issues. We need to be a lot clearer than we are as a field, as computer scientists, about what are our field's actual goals. Do we have professional standards? Have we ever written them down? Do we ever ask our students to conform to standards? What will we do if we're asked to do things that go beyond a boundary? Where is that boundary? What the heck are we doing? And so I think the trick to be effective at this type of work is to work from the inside of AI practice. Right? We've got all these engineers that we're training, we're sending them off to OpenAI and Anthropic and so on. Right? And we could sit on the side and theorize about it, but I think that the thing that is needed here is to figure out how you create an AI professional society or something like this. How do we get ethics into the field of AI? I think it's pretty urgent. How do we do it quickly? If people have thoughts about this, I would love help setting it up. Or somebody, or if somebody knows it's already going on, let's figure this out. So I think this is a very serious issue and something where social scientists might have some of the expertise to help us figure it out. Those are my three topics. Thank you very much.